Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Neil Foley from the Business Growth Club here again today. I'm really fortunate today to be with an old friend of mine, Oliver Hill. How are you, Oliver?
I'm very good, thank you, and thanks for having me on for a podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I'll ask you to see how much you enjoyed it by the end, but hopefully you will. So Oliver's got a company called Hill Coaching Company, which is fundamentally different than most coaching companies I've ever come across, and that'll come across over hopefully in the next 30 minutes or so as we talk through. So shall we kick off with just that open question then, Oliver? What is Hill Coaching Company, and how is that different than any other form of business coaching?
Yeah, I suppose Hill Coaching Company took a lot of thinking around the fact that my surname is Hill, and I'm running a coaching company. Yeah. So in terms of brand awareness, I was really trying to ram that one home. But in terms of what we offer, that's the crux. I have a mixed sort of experience in direct project management, and also having been heavily involved in a family-run business, and it's sort of a few businesses tied to that, and they've all been reasonably successful. What I've also realised, though, is the value of people, and I know that sounds absolutely obvious, but in my early days as a project manager, and certainly in the family business, I don't think we ever took any time to find anything out about the people we employed. We very much saw them as numbers. We had expectations of them, whether I'd be in a project management role or in the family business. And if they didn't perform, they'd be out on their ear, or we'd be having a difficult conversation. Very rarely did we compliment them. Very rarely was I personally or the businesses aware of what they needed.
So very driven in terms of just, this is your job, just do.
Yeah, and I would look back on it and say I wasn't unsuccessful, and the businesses that I've been involved in and the teams I managed weren't unsuccessful. Targets that were set were hit more often than not. The issue would be, looking back, was that done efficiently? Not sure. Was it done pleasantly? Definitely not. But did I miss opportunities within the teams that I was managing or the companies that we had? And the answer is definitely, because we spent absolutely no time at all getting to know the people that we didn't immediately warm to. If some of them towed the line or they just clicked with us personality-wise, I had no reason to know why that happened, but you'd warm to them and you'd gravitate towards those individuals. And the people that perhaps would, for my case, one of my pet peeves were people who argued or disagreed with my tyrannical reign and way of thinking. I would see them as irritating people, and wouldn't want to spend any more time with them. And they would be in the management roles. And you can imagine I'd bring people into a project team, say I had 5 people in it, to very much clearly give them my vision for the way forward, allocate tasks, get them to understand how we will do my will. Anybody who had a question around that was not on the same page as me. They weren't on my team, so they're clearly negative. They were clearly people that I needed to push to the outside and get rid of as quickly as I could, in my mind. What I began to realise when I came across a particular tool, which I'll refer to in a little bit more detail later, I began to realise that there are reasons for people's behaviours. Not many people set out in the morning to deliberately annoy you, piss you off, or, excuse me, language, apologies for that. I'll try and keep that down to a minimum. But yeah, ultimately, most people do intend to do well. And there are reasons why people behave in the way they are, why some people are good at things and good at others. But that seems so blooming obvious, but it wasn't to me until I came across something called Clifton Strengths, which really, first of all, rammed home what my natural talents are. And when I began to read the information that came out of this information to myself, I recognised certain traits of myself, and then began to apply that to other people, I began to realise something, that I was quite ineffective. And not only that, I was quite unpleasant to work for, and was certainly not getting the most out of people. And I began to realise that this was a really effective way of getting to find out the needs of individuals. So how to, first of all, communicate my needs, but more importantly here, how these people needed to be communicated with, how they were most effective. And no greater example of that is the sets of people that had historically annoyed me, the ones who would come to the meeting and ask questions, potentially argue with me. The exact reason they did that was because I wasn't providing them with information in advance, because they aren't the people who could blindly follow. They'd need to understand, they needed to investigate.
So you're not just telling them to build widgets.
Yeah.
That there's more to their role than
Yeah.
just press button B.
Exactly. Yeah. So it wouldn't necessarily be quite so relevant to a frontline service, an operative, where it's just clearly follow these procedures. Most of my teams I managed were in fairly creative roles.
Okay.
Certainly in the public sector, a lot of them were non-statutory, and yet they would have thoughts. Which is different to mine and not something I was comfortable with. But when I began to realise that if I gave them the time they needed and at least controlled that time, but I would maybe give them a few days notice about what I was going to be talking to them about at the meeting, not only would they feel more comfortable, they would also go off and research what I was thinking, and they would come back with not arguments against, but ideas to enhance what I was doing.
Oh, okay.
I began to realise, blimey, this is gold, because no, I hadn't thought about that. And suddenly, instead of being reluctant, I would seek these people out and say, do you know what, in a couple of weeks or a month or whatever, I'm thinking of this. Here's a little bit of an idea, a bit of scope around what I'm looking to do. I'd really appreciate your input.
So a far more collaborative approach rather than I'm the boss. And
realising that actually I knew very little. I was just very good and comfortable at making decisions. It's pretty good at recognising who would be good at certain things in a proactive way. But I hadn't realised the skill sets that other people in the room had, because I wasn't allowing them and I wasn't enabling them. And all our projects and all our business focus had its success in spite of my approach, but actually could have been far more effective, far more efficient if I'd also involved these people, because we made a lot of mistakes. And a lot of things I had to wing it. And only the reason that we succeeded is because I like talking and I could talk my way to out of any situation most of the time. But wouldn't it be nice to not have to do that? And the more and more I looked at setting up teams, and I reorganised and restructured teams around making sure that we had a complementary set of talents and skills in the room, help them understand what these people needed versus what those people needed. And suddenly my natural skill set, my own talents were being put to good use, because that's what I'm good at. I'm not the most effective completer finisher, I'm not a great doer, but I am good at working out the needs of people and to get the most out of them. So it is still quite a sort of a selfish set of talents there, but I was able to rechannel them and refine them to get the most out of people. And they had a lot of success, and people were a lot happier. The retention rate in staff went
so
up.
there's a real direct correlation, presumably, in terms of retention.
Absolutely, and this is where I began to realise that there's a genuine business model here, and there is a uniqueness in my approach to coaching, because there is it's a very congested market out there. And my USP is that I've been involved in a family-run business, and I'm very aware of the pitfalls that come with working with your father and other relatives. Versus I've also managed a lot of people, and I've done it quite badly. But I'm quite comfortable admitting that, which not so many people are. But I can talk to people at a level that they relate to and understand about my personal experiences. We don't even need to confront the fact that that might be how they are, but they can hear things that they would recognise. I can also start, when we go into more detail, explaining how we fix that. But most importantly, I can actually see a value-added interest in this. Your bottom line increases, your staff retention, and obviously new staff recruitment is blooming expensive. Well, that reduces massively. In fact, in some places it stops. Recruiting effective people. I've got a client at the moment who is securing people from a competitor on a regular basis because it's such a great place to work. Because they've spent 2 years working with me, instilling what I call a strengths-based culture, which looks at what people are naturally talented at and gets them to spend as much time as possible doing the things they're good at every day. Well, it makes it a really pleasant place to work. And that, I can see, is a huge value added.
So it's not just fluffy, is it, in terms of nice to do? Well, there is a business angle here.
This is the big thing for me. I come at it from a very corporate perspective, very commercially driven. I'm not in it purely for the basis of health and well-being. I'm not in it and saying that we should be making everybody's lives lovely and that everybody should work a 20-hour week and it's all about the staff. What I'm saying is if you look after your staff, the bottom line improves. It just naturally happens. It's organic. So I come at it, well-being is a way of getting the most out of people. So I'm still in it from trying to make profits. Baseline is still your profit line is still very important. But I realise that staff are really, really important, and anyone who isn't investing in their staff and recognising that that's where most of the value comes from, are making a mistake. They're being inefficient. They're not giving their company the full potential. They're probably unaware of talents they already pay for that are in the company because a job description says someone must do this. Well, we never thought about other talents that they might have, things they might be able to bring to the table, because we simply don't communicate, we don't ask. And I'm beginning to realise that this is a very serious value for money offer that's on the table that is available through coaching generically. But I think I can start the conversation at a level that more and more business owners and leaders and management teams will relate to. But I can also have the conversation with people on the front line, and I can get that two-way conversation going because I've done it, I've seen it, and I've been at the point where I didn't want to entertain that, and now I would never do anything other than make sure that there's healthy two-way conversation.
So that does give you quite a unique perspective, I think, working for a successful family business and then in the public sector, and being very self-aware, as you clearly now are, where there was a time, I guess, that wouldn't have been the description people would give it to you.
No, I think there was plenty of descriptions for me. None of them were particularly polite. I thought I had self-awareness because I did think that I was a bit special. And I think one of the big transformations for myself is realising that I'm really not in that context. I am not. I don't have all the knowledge. I don't have all the answers. I do like being in charge, and I have still got some issues around control, but realising that the only way that can be effective is if I engage everybody fully in the process, get them on board, then I'm much more likely to influence them to do what's necessary. And by transferring that style and that knowledge, however suitable, into organisations, businesses, no matter how small or large they are, is going to be effective. It's still early days. I mean, I've only been running the company a year and a half. I'm very lucky to have some existing clients that I work with, and we're growing the new client base organically quite slowly, but at a pace that I can handle. But 2018, I've got the confidence behind the business now. We're really going out there to sort of try and say to people, look, we've got something to show you, and yes, there's a cost associated to it, but actually there's a value to it, and rather than focus on how much it may or may not cost, look at the value. And the company behind the tool I use is Gallup, and a lot of people will know them from the work they do on statistics and research. And they can put a value on a strength-based culture seeing an increase of up to 8% on productivity.
Really?
And I just say to MDs, financial directors, put that into whatever machine it is that processes your forecasting for sales, income, what have you, and look at the difference that makes. And the only way, all you've got to do is just effectively be nice and considerate to your staff, talk to them effectively, make things clear to them, make sure that it's okay for them to communicate, and find out a bit more about them. And it really is only going to take maybe a matter of months to see the benefits of this.
Well, for an 8% improvement in productivity.
Why on earth wouldn't you explore this possibility? And it then goes into recruitment as well. You wouldn't use the tools and techniques I have to directly recruit, but you would use it to add value to the recruitment process, to make sure you're aware of what you have in your organisation already, but also when you're interviewing people, let's find out where their natural talents lie. Let's steer an interview process to ensure that they can perform their best in the interview, so we can see how they are likely to perform and also gel with the existing culture and team. Now I realise it's a no-brainer.
That's one of the interesting points, isn't it? Because I know in talking to you in the past, and we'll come on to this bit about how you focus on people's strengths. Actually, that just seems so frigging obvious. How can this suddenly be the smack the forehead and think, oh, grief? Yeah, it seems amazing, doesn't it?
It is fascinating, and it's frustrating on equal measure. But at the same time, I think we all get a little hung up on processes, and there's a lot of potentially poor advice out there that is also seen as quite outcome driven, which if we invest in a training program for our staff, maybe a 6-figure sum, you can say to the staff, look, we've invested heavily in you. Really what's potentially being created is a way and a behaviour that's expected to be seen. So the management team are sold this package, and they're told that your staff should start looking like this, and all it's really can be used for is a stick to beat them with when it comes to performance review time, when they're saying, oh, but you're not being like this, we're not seeing it, and the staff are thinking, well, either I have to try and use the language that's now being taught to me, or I don't, and that becomes a bit of an issue for conflict. But more importantly, they're going into a workshop and maybe the information in there is gold, but who's there to help them implement this new knowledge?
Yeah.
And without direct coaching support or managers who've been given coaching support training so that they can be a proper manager, it tends to fall flat. And management teams are frustrated because it's not quite worked. Staff are frustrated because they think they're still performing well, but suddenly they're not manifesting the behaviours they're supposed to. It's just wholly ineffective on the main. Not always. And I think there's some training which is really complementary, but without this coaching style, which I think you would aim to get in as a cultural shift, so it becomes part of the management process.
Yep.
So the idea isn't to make myself solely indispensable, is actually to try and bring this culture into an organisation so I can leave it there and leave the organisation to run happily because they know what they're doing. Well, that's a hell of a lot more effective because it's direct daily communication, and it runs back to this whole point, it's basic communication. Yeah. And I talk a few times to Millie Bramley, who talks about conflict resolution, and all these conflicts can be so easily avoided if we just think about what we say, how we say it, why we say it, and be more aware of how these people would probably prefer to receive information.
And is that where you're using the tools that you use as well as your own experience? Because this idea of focusing on people's strengths, is how they want to communicate and how they communicate with other people. Is that part of that?
Yeah,
concept.
The whole drive behind it. There's the guru, or the godfather of strength, as we'd call him. Sadly passed away in about 2003. A chap called Donald Clifton set up the Clifton Strength Finder. He just basically deals with, imagine what will happen if we stop fixating on what is wrong with people, and worrying about that, and we start concentrating on what is right with people. And actually, if you look at the old-fashioned appraisal systems that reflect on the year's performance, and what went well as far as you're concerned, what didn't go so well, so what are we going to focus on training you at doing? Well, if we step back and think, maybe that person's never going to be that good at that particular area, and that's why they need the training in it, and actually encourage them to go and train on something that they're just going to find disengaging, well, then you can start to see where Gallup's statistics behind the number of disengaged employees come from. So just in those who don't know it, only 13% of employees are what Gallup would describe as actively engaged in the workplace. 13, 1-3.
Oh my goodness. So
60% of them are engaged, which means they come and do the job that's expected of them, but it's only, fulfilling the role, maybe have a 9 till 5 job, so they do okay. They don't do much wrong, but they don't do much above and beyond. The one that I love, though, is roughly 20%. And the figures change every time they do a report, but roughly 20%. So let's put that in context. 1 in 5 staff are actively disengaged, which means they dislike their job, and they are very happy to share that with the group around them.
Of course.
And
they can become a key influence.
Yeah, well, I call them terrorists, because that's effectively what they do.
Under the radar. Yeah.
But the reason is that they are disengaged because they're not getting fed what they need to be effective. And when you sit there and have the conversation and go through that thing that I explained, the realisation that actually a large part of it is the fault of the employer, not the employee, because the employer just hasn't effectively, for want of a better word, bothered to find out why. They've just accused them of not being effective, or they've never listened to their ideas, they've just not engaged, or the best I can have is some people communicate from the bottom up an idea that does get implemented, but it never gets fed back to that person that it was considered or implemented, or it was considered a good idea but we weren't able to do it. There just is none of that conversation. So they feel frustrated, but in actual fact something has happened, but no one's thought to mention it to the person. They become really, really upset. When I've gone in and had coaching conversations, I said, but the management team are working on X, Y, Z. And you're joking. So for a year I've thought they haven't listened. Well, then they have, but no one thought to tell me. These are some simple stuff that you can do.
It is. I agree with you. It's simple, but actually, it's quite complex, isn't it? Because if I'm an employer, and I've operated in the sense of you just do your job and we'll all be happy. To suddenly have this, what do I suddenly talk to you and say?
Yes.
How are you doing then today, Oliver? And any ideas for the business? So without your structure or some form of external, because people listen to the external advisor. Actually, it's quite tricky, isn't it? It's quite brave, but actually quite tricky.
It is, and to do it cold turkey, I can give you a prime example. When I first came across this tool, and I sort of used it a little bit for myself, for my own personal development, and got so far, because I've now fully certified in using the tools. But I got so far in my own understanding. I decided to use it in one of my projects that I was using, and I invited all the members of the team to a meeting, having made them do the assessment and use the word made at that particular point. I didn't make it optional, I just told them I want them to do it. And they, as I learned later, they didn't confide in me at the particular time, but they were all crapping themselves because suddenly, out of the blue, I'd asked them to do an assessment and I'd invite them to a one-to-one, and they were thinking, well, meetings with Oliver are never normally a good thing. So they were absolutely terrified. So if you imagine suddenly you try and be this completely different leader or management team, people are immediately going to be,
there's an ulterior motive here.
So it does need to be done, and the nicest way, it's ideal that in the long term the culture, you embed what I do within your organisation, but the nice thing about having an external individual coming in is that you can see it for what it is, that the company it runs its certain way, and there's certain behaviours that just become established, and it's very hard to see the wood from the trees. Whereas someone like myself can come in and challenge things a little bit, and also give individual members of staff or teams some confidence that they have someone that they can actually just pour their heart out to in the early days, because there is often a bit of bloodletting that needs to go on, and in the result of that they gain confidence because they see that it's confidential, it doesn't go anywhere. I made that very clear to the ownership and the management team in the early days, that I will hear stuff that you won't get to know about that is quite serious. There's always a disclaimer. If there's anything of a particular note, then we may have to stop the sessions, but it gives them that opportunity, and that's really useful for me because I hear stuff that I can style my coaching around, so I can't give the specific information out, but I can start to work that all my levels of coaching, whether it be in frontline staff, team leaders, middle management, senior management, ultimate leadership teams, I hear stuff which is really insightful for me that doesn't need to involve any portrayal of confidence, but will form how I will coach, and makes it very, very clear what's needed in that organisation. So the benefits and the changes are really impactful and very, very, very quick. That's the thing. The turnarounds that you'll see can be as quick as 6 months. Really, and it's
which in changing behaviours and culture is pretty astonishing.
I think it is, but it's also. I mean, we talked about it not being easy, but once you've been through it and everybody understands this effective language that I try and establish. It is pretty straightforward. And once you've got over the questioning, and some people are a bit more sceptical than others, once we've overcome that and everybody's got to the point where actually what your sets of talents are and the tool that we use becomes almost irrelevant because it's just established part of the language, it's actually what you do with it and the results that you get. That's where the confidence comes, because you try certain things and they work and you dabble. And suddenly you wake up 6 months, 12 months down the line, and it's a different place. And you can't actually pinpoint when that happened, but to just see that happening
it must be very satisfying.
Yeah, it is.
And presumably you get people who are just in the wrong jobs.
Yes.
So you suddenly think, what are you doing? You've got so many other. If you're focusing on strengths, you've got so much more to give. Well, what are you doing in this bit?
The lovely thing is that, again, I can articulate examples that are things that I've lived through, because I have had exactly that. I went into one of our family businesses, did this level of coaching with a manager of ours who it would turn out was a single point of failure, and they were in a business that sold the equipment around a hobby they thoroughly enjoyed, but they realised that the business had become a cage because they were surrounded by all these lovely things that they weren't able to use. And what they really wanted to do was being out there showing people how to use this equipment. And on taking the assessment and having some coaching with me, handed in their notice.
Really?
Yeah, and quite quickly. And when I looked, our contract of employment was bonkers because they'd been in the business for 18 years and they didn't have to give much notice. And my father and his business partner basically turned around to me and said, well, you caused this mess, you fix it. So the good news from him, he set up a wonderful business on his own, and he's doing really, really well. I'm really proud of him. In the short term, it caused me a massive headache, but it gave me an opportunity to really apply this in a serious world where we're at a business that has now lost its main member of staff. The huge knowledge base, can it survive having someone who doesn't know anything about the business come in and make it work? And the answer is yes, because over 18 months we fixed this business. It's now turning a profit. The other manager, we realised, wasn't quite as effective as he could have been because he wasn't really doing what he wanted. He's happy. The business has moved on. It survived. They've now got this culture in the organisation. and it's turning a tidy profit. So I can, when instructed by clients, I can give a bit more specific detail on what that looks like, how it happened. But I've got actual examples of how this works, and ultimately I put my money where my mouth is, because I've invested a lot of money setting up this company when I have a whole host of other options I could have taken, but none of them appealed to me. So
well, this way you're able. I know it's a trite thing to say. I mean, I don't mean it that way, but it can be. But this way, you can actually make a difference, can't you? You can to people's lives and well-being, and you're pushing on an open door in some ways, because I think, Aviva is obviously the biggest employer, or one of the biggest employers in our area, and they've really embraced well-being, this is part of, haven't they? They really have at the moment in a big way, and Aviva have always been a decent company, but they're doing it because of the bottom line.
Yes. Yes, they're not. It's not all out of the goodness of their heart.
No, it's bottom line.
They see the benefit of it, yeah.
And in particular in our area, because I think, was it Price Bailey who did some surveys or whatever, where the big problem is attracting the right calibre of staff, isn't it?
Especially in this location.
In this location where we're struggling with that. Whereas what you're doing, if it stops the attrition rate and helps with retention, and presumably you can have a company where it becomes, as you were saying with your client, that actually becomes a good place to work. So it becomes something where people will aspire to belong to.
Well, you do. You end up, without realising it, poaching, because you don't have to target them necessarily. You don't even have to go and ask them. A job comes up at your organisation, and people in your competitors are looking for them.
Yes.
Whereas you may not have been on that list, and they're quite comfortable, and they've heard about you, and there's nothing that makes you stand out from them. They wouldn't. Suddenly a role comes up at your organisation, and there is you have a plethora of options, and the headache becomes who do we recruit, because they're all so good.
Nice headache to have.
You have a bit of a waiting list, and it seems simplistic to suggest that comes from purely engaging someone like myself, but it is ultimately changing the culture, because as a coach you come in and you do what you do, but the individuals are still got to own it. Yeah. So I get a lot of thanks for the work I do in the relatively small number of clients I have, but the transitions and transformations have been key. But I remind them it's not me. No. It's a tool. I've shown you how to use the tool, but it's you.
And also being the external consultant, it helps everybody, doesn't it, to refer them.
Yeah.
I heard a great phrase yesterday, which sums up some of the things you're talking about, which just comes to mind. If you're in an abusive relationship, but they buy you presents, how do you feel? And actually, it's still an abusive relationship, and the presents don't have a lot of value. Yeah. And that's really
Christmas bonus.
It's, I'm a good employer. What's your problem?
Yeah, I pay them well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you begin to realise, and especially now with the younger generation in particular, but the money still has obviously it has a point. But ultimately, it's the added value. It's the fact that it fits with their sort of morals, and they're far more attuned to it. But it's not just for young people. But that's become very, very clear.
There is a difference
when that sort of younger generation is coming through. And it's interesting as well the clash that's also coming in, because a lot more younger companies are very open to my style of coaching, and they're far more receptive. Whereas you get the sort of the older generations who are still fairly sceptical.
Yes.
And I have to change my style of communication based on the audience that I'm engaging with, because, as you rightly point out, the bottom line is the driver. Even for the companies who are a bit more morally and environmentally conscious, they still got to make enough money to keep doing what they do. And I'll give you a prime example. One of the major clients who use the style of coaching I do, I wish they were my client, but they're just someone that uses the Gallup tool, is Facebook.
Really?
And I look at, there couldn't be a better advocate for if someone like Facebook is doing it, and ultimately the way they work with it, every single member of staff, because they know the talent out there. I mean, at the end of the day, they know everybody in this earth who's engaged on social media, so they know who they want to employ. So from recruiting talent's not difficult, but making sure that person is as effective as possible. The day they start, they get them to do the assessment tool that I use, and from that they structure their contract of employment. They work out what team to focus them in, all based around that individual's strengths and how effectively they will work with other sets of people. If ultimately an organisation like that's doing it, then I think if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for anybody, isn't it? And then another person I'm a fan of, Eric Schmidt, who was the president, I believe, is the right terminology, of Google. He just basically swears by everyone needs a coach.
Yes.
And what I instill in organisations is coach sounds like me. I've set up my own coaching company. No, that's not it. Every person who has an interaction with a person is a coach, because they're manifesting behaviours that may be adopted by that person. But every manager, they're not really a manager, they're a coach. And when you begin to realise that...
It's a better term, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a better term. It is, because I'm a big believer that managers shouldn't get too involved in the day-to-day doing, because they're there to get the most out of the people that they're managing. So employers who set their managers up to manage people and do a full-time job, well, that's not really effective.
No.
You're making their lives very, very difficult. And when do they get a chance to manage people? So part of what we do is people begin to realise the structure of their organisation needs a change, and everything.
It's a mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because I can imagine in some ways it's quite liberating, isn't it? To be able to think, actually, I haven't got to have all the answers. I haven't got to I've got to see things through. But actually the team collectively working to their strengths, we're stronger as a team than we are as a group of individuals.
The word that often comes up is trust. Okay. And for me personally, to trust that people can do the things that I've asked them to do, or they say they can do, well, I've got to actually let them have a go.
Yeah.
But I've got to set the environment up as well to make it conducive. You can't just blindly let them go. But the more little things you can try them with, the more faith you get in that they can do it. And the more confident they become, the more honestly, yes, the liberating feeling is something I thoroughly enjoyed, and therefore I know other people like me will enjoy it as well.
Well, your passion comes through with that, Oliver. So, what sort of businesses do you want to work with? You talked about the family business that you understand better than the vast majority because you've been in it.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot to be a bit more specific about it. I mean, there isn't a business that I would necessarily turn down if they're open-minded to this. I mean, I work in the finance sector, I work in the retail sector, I have direct experience in that. I'm starting to work in the tech sector and sort of publishing and media. So they're areas I have special experience in, so a bit more knowledge. But ultimately, what I really want to hear about is people who maybe have a bit of a high turnover of staff, or an organisation that seems to be performing quite well in terms of profitability or growth, but they can't keep their key staff, or they've lost one or two. If that's a recurring issue, they're the sorts of people that I would definitely be interested in speaking to, because I know where that will be coming from, and there may be some uncomfortable things that you may need to hear, but I think I can caveat that in a way that they will be more receptive to, because I don't come at it as that you need to just be nice to your staff. How can you be so mean? I come at it and say, look, this is the benefits you will see in trying to look after your staff in this way. And I can think of a few companies I'm hearing noises about who have grown because they have a great idea, they've got a wonderful entrepreneur who has a wonderful mind, but perhaps isn't used to managing people and a business. And there's nothing wrong with that. They may never want to admit that, but ultimately there's nothing wrong with it. They're the people that I can come in and help and say, well, actually now we need to look at the structure of your organisation. And one of the really interesting things that comes out of this is that I'm beginning to grow a real network of knowledge and support around me. And through the coaching conversations, we realise other needs within the business. And I have a growing list of people who can come in and deliver that sort of support as well. So I'm not going to come in and try and be the answer to all your problems, but equally I can highlight things at management level and say, actually, not only have I seen this problem, but I have a couple of people who might be able to aid you in the solution. And I always remember one of my CEOs saying to me, don't come to me with problems, come to me with a solution. And I thought that was just a little bit of management jargon, but actually having received it now, when people just say that's wrong, it's draining. But if actually they come and say, I've noticed this, and I've noticed that we have a few issues, but actually if you did X, Y or Z, and you're like, oh, it's no longer a stress, because you're like, I'll give that a go. I've got a solution.
Which is all we care about, ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's good you've seen the problem, but you've actually researched it, you care enough to fix it. And I say, in my network, which, a big believer in Thrive, but I have some businesses outside that as well, I've got a real growing base of people that I can refer to, trust, who can deliver a huge amount of extra support that perhaps wasn't obvious at the start. It's great.
So I know you're very open to having conversations with anybody who's intrigued and wants to find out more. No obligation. How do people get in touch with you, Oliver?
Yeah, so I've got various mediums. You can get hold of me, my website, and I'm on social media. So
what's the website address?
The website is www.strengths, strengthshcc.co.uk. Having done
Rolls
that,
off the tongue.
Yeah, having done that now, when I realise, having had the website for a year, it needs to change, because explaining that is strengths with an S, hcc.co.uk, wasn't quite so smart as it sounded at the time. I'm trying to give people my emails, which is also Oliver at strengths.co.uk, strengthshcc.co.uk. That's much more difficult than it should be. That aside, they can obviously get in contact through me via that email. I'm on social media. LinkedIn is often a good way to start as well. I love to make a connection on there. Tend to only connect with people with I can then follow up with a one-to-one and a coffee. And that's how it would start. And if someone would like to just give me a call, like I say, on my website, you've got all the various different ways to get hold of me, and I'll come in and have a no obligation chat, talk to people. I'll happily do a presentation to them, management team, boards, whoever. I'm just interested in getting the idea out there. I'm not to be coming in with the hard pushy sales, and I'm not going to be expecting to walk away with a contract. It's just I have an idea, I know it works, and I want more opportunities to show you how, and grow the client base and grow the cultures that I'm trying to establish.
Make a difference.
Make a difference.
Finally, just and you haven't had any warning of this question, but just finally,
he's got that look.
I've got that look. But if you were taking yourself back to a young man, maybe 18 or 19 years old or whatever, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'll tell yourself, first of all, you're only 18, 19. Shockingly, you don't know very much at all. Be nice to people, because that sort of borders on arrogance, your approach to things, and just listen. Just listen a little bit more. And I suppose as a young person, I was told a lot by my father, who was a very successful businessman, and therefore thought, well, I'm not getting told what to do all my life. So I wanted to make myself my own man. And really, that was not a sensible approach. Spent my 20s fighting against everything I possibly could, and almost going against the grain because I thought I should. And that's a very draining experience. And also to realise that a lot of what goes up in your head is made up. And I've had some fascinating insights recently with some people I've started working with. Big shout out to Gary Burton, who I've met only in the last few months. And he's had a big impact on me, along with also yourself, Neil, and also John Burrows. Listen to people. Listen to people. You do not have to do what they say. Just listen. And it's the one thing I know I never did in my early, most formative years, from the age of probably 14 to 24. I never listened. I thought I knew it all. And I do hear that in a lot of young people in particular. They feel this self-belief and confidence, which is great. But there's nothing wrong with considering. You don't even have to admit you're listening, but just try and let it absorb, because some of it sinks in, and even though you may not use it then, you may find that actually you come to it at a later point in life, and you will be meeting some fantastic people. And if you don't go with your ears open, you're going to be missing some really good advice, or opportunities to learn from their mistakes, because everybody's made them. So why don't you try and avoid them?
Try listening. No, that's a good one, because the reality is nobody ever learned anything by talking.
No.
It's got to be 2 ears, 1 mouth. Well, that's been fascinating, Oliver, and I really appreciate your time. Hope everybody's enjoyed that. So get in touch with Oliver. Just have a talk, have this conversation that we were talking about just now. So thanks very much, everybody, and goodbye.